I'm Bianca, and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to Delivering on Climate Change, our collective challenge. I'm Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. Our task today is to get all of us to net zero. My special guest is Emma Lawrance. Emma is Director of Strategy and Research at Climate Cares Institute at the Climate Cares Centre, Global Health Innovation. She leads the mental health strategy for the Institute, primarily encompassing research and innovation in digital mental health support and the climate change and mental health programme Climate Cares. She is also a member of the Mental Health Innovations team, leading the partnership with Imperial researchers to study the Shout dataset and supervising students. Other work includes a focus on youth mental health and improving the use of mental health data from charities to better understand mental health needs and the impact of services. Emma's background is in physics and chemistry and science communication and neuroscience. She can boast a variety of previous roles, including work across science communication and science education. She has used computational modelling to examine how uncertainty is processed in the brain and affects decisions, particularly for those with a tendency to experience anxiety. She has also examined the interactions between perceptual uncertainty and strategy uncertainty and how our brain integrates this information to modulate attentional systems for goal-directed behaviour. So welcome to Emma, my guest today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Hannah.
And that's quite a CV. That is quite a lot of information that I've just read out. And can I talk for a moment a little bit about your career? Because you've been involved with and led hugely successful and thought-provoking research. And you've spoken to probably thousands of people. So where does your interest in research and now mental health research come from?
Yeah, thanks so much, Hannah. I mean, I've had a lifelong curious brain and I've a lifelong love of nature. And I was very lucky. My homeland is Ghana country of the Ghana people of the Adelaide Hills. And so what's home to me is to be surrounded by gum trees and koalas and birds. So from a young age, sort of nature was my playground. And it was very obvious to me that we are a part of nature and not apart from nature in a sense, and that it made sense to me to want to protect it, to love it, and to my health and well-being benefited hugely from that relationship really with the wider natural world. But I also had a deep curiosity to understand how it worked, and that led me to, it's a longer story, but led me to study science. And I really, really enjoyed that, really trying to understand, why is the universe here? Who are we? All of those very, very big questions have always sort of puzzled me. And so I felt like I could unpack some of that from a physics lens. And then I guess my interest in the brain and in neuroscience and mental health came through, again, several strands coming together. I mean, part of it was that curiosity about the wider world of, how do animals think? What is it to experience different ways of being? What makes us us? How do different beings, what do they experience the world? And so neuroscience was one lens into that. But also I had a mental illness myself. I was first diagnosed when I was 14 with quite a severe mental health challenge that has taken various forms over the years and various diagnoses. But through that, came to both understand that we don't really know what's going on in other people's lives and their experiences. And I had a deep curiosity to understand, what was going on, I guess, in my brain, and also how we could help. And so all of those things together led to when I first moved over to the UK 12 years ago, I was studying neuroscience, and alongside that, I founded a youth mental health charity, which was really about storytelling, about sharing stories and messages of hope and support, which really comes into my work now as well with climate. It was called It Gets Brighter, the charity, and it was at a time when there weren't the platforms there are now for people to create, watch and share sort of moderated messages of hope and support. and to have those role models, those connections. And so connection and story has always been important to me alongside kind of data and evidence.
Sorry to interrupt, but I see that I see that you did, in fact, you founded It Gets Brighter, and you're still a trustee. And so you've used your personal experience to build on and make a difference. And I want to talk about that thread of storytelling, because that's really fundamental to so much of your research. I think you must have spoken to probably thousands of people about their experience of climate and climate anxiety. But what I want to understand, Emma, is what is climate anxiety in very simple terms?
Great question. Researchers are still asking really what is climate anxiety or eco-anxiety. These concepts are relatively new terms, but they have been used a lot in the last years in the media. Like all concepts or labels, they can be used in different ways by different people, and sometimes people find them very, very helpful. Sometimes people find them a bit constraining. From a research lens, we're still understanding what is a very evolving experience of our own awareness and experience of how rapidly the climate is changing and this crisis or climate breakdown that we're now living through, and how that interacts with our lives and also with the wider systems in which we live. And so different people experience that in different ways, depending on their culture, depending on their background, depending on their direct exposure to climate hazards, depending on their awareness of how that might be linked to climate or climate inaction, of leaders and decision makers, of what that might mean for their future. And so people can respond in a range of different ways, and those can be related to different thoughts or narratives we might hold or be told. Some of those might be, the future is frightening, we're doomed, technology will solve everything, there's no need to worry, I feel guilty about my impact, I'm too small to make a difference. There's a lot of different threads, but also then different emotions that come, and that can be, like you say, it has been defined, particularly eco-anxiety or climate anxiety, as a chronic fear of, in the case of eco-anxiety, environmental doom. Climate anxiety is more specific to climate rather than the wider crisis as well. But then there's also feelings of anger, of guilt, of despair, but also people can have responses of determination, of hope, of inspiration, of people can find meaning and purpose in the struggle. And then also we have different ways that we all respond in our behaviors and in how that affects us. So for some people, they can hold that distress or that awareness and not have it affect their sort of daily life. It doesn't affect their future decisions. For other people, it really does. And it might affect their sleep or their relationships, their ability to work, the decisions they're making for their future. Everyone is different and everyone is complex.
And of course, it really matters. I think you just alluded to where you are in the world. I think your research showed that 84% of 1,000 young people surveyed in the Philippines in 2021 were very or extremely worried about climate change versus, I think, 58% in France. So, of course, it matters where you are in the world and how you're impacted.
Yeah, for sure. Different people in different parts of the world think about both climate and about mental health in very different ways as well. So, when we talk to people from traditional cultures, Indigenous communities, they'll say, when the land is well, I'm well, that mental health is really for them about emotional, spiritual, cultural, community, land health and well-being. But in some cultures, there's huge stigma against mental health. And so the way they might describe their experiences and their distress might be really different. And also what it means to be experiencing the changing climate might be really different. Some communities would think of it and talk about it as climate change. Other communities would say, well, we used to be able to plant a crop at this time of year and now we can't anymore. The typhoons have always come, but now they're coming harder, they're coming faster. I don't know what this means for my future. And so there's a lot of different experiences, but what we find, and we've found in data even in the US of nearly 3,000 young people, is that when the young people self-reported that they had already experienced climate-related impacts, then their eco-anxiety was significantly higher. It was quite a big jump in the average experience of of eco-anxiety when they already knew what it was to be affected by a changing climate, and that interacted with the decisions they're making for their future.
And of course, we talk about young people, and we have to think, is it really worse for young people? Because already there are so many other mental health issues that young people are facing in our society. It's not just about climate, but presumably this is heightening the mental health crisis.
A phrase that gets used sometimes is that climate change is a risk multiplier. And what that means is that it's essentially compounding these stresses that people might already feel. So young people, there's been these rising rates of mental ill health among young people around the world. And that's potentially due to many different factors. But when you look at the things that support good mental health and well-being, like strong communities, a stable education, access to healthcare, clean air, food and water security, low rates of poverty, social connection, good relationships, being free from extreme trauma situations, being free from conflict, all of these things are being undermined by the changing climate. So more and more young people are exposed to extreme heat, to air pollution, all of these environmental stresses that we know are linked to poorer mental health and well-being, but then also economic stresses, forced migration, their education being interrupted. We hear from young people in certain parts of the world and from people of all ages that when it's extremely hot now and getting hotter, that they can't go outside, they can't meet their friends, they can't exercise. Sometimes their schools are being closed. And so it's this disruption of their normal development and this added accumulation of stresses that can increase the risk of mental health challenges and worsen the things that we know in other ways might lead to mental health problems, reduce their access sometimes to appropriate support. But then on top of that and interacting with that is this awareness of, for many young people, a sense of being unsafe, that the systems that are supposed to keep them safe, the adults that are supposed to keep them safe, have really let them down.
You talked about a few of the things that people can do. I mean, presumably part of that is good leadership, having good leadership and encouraging young people to be at that table of decision making and encouraging young people to be part of that conversation. When does the normal concern and conversation around our climate, and we're having this conversation all of the time, but when do you think it tips negatively to impact on mental health?
Absolutely, action with other people can be really beneficial for our own mental health and well-being, as well as for climate action. And fundamentally, it's to get to the first part of your question, with leadership, visible, proportionate leadership, leaders stepping up and doing the right thing, going by science-based targets. That is powerful. It has ripple effects. It can alleviate a lot of the distress. If leaders were stepping up, if everyone was taking action, if there was opportunities, like you said, for young people to be involved, that their voices and their opinions are being listened to and responded to in this regard, then that is really, really powerful. Part of that is giving young people opportunities to be part of that. And also part of that is not putting the burden just on them, because for many young people, they say, in a way they can sometimes feel like adults are saying, well, okay, oh, great that the young people care. That gives me hope. That gives them an out, in a sense, to be, they're the ones in power now. They need to be making the decisions now for now and for future. If we think about when does eco-anxiety tip over into something that becomes damaging, again, this is something that people are actively exploring, but fundamentally, it's an understandable, healthy, adaptive response to feel anxious or distressed in light of the information, and having spaces and support to enable us to lean into that, in a sense, to feel what we feel, to have spaces to grieve, spaces to talk about that fear. And that's something we're working on at the Climate Care Centre, is how to integrate climate and mental health education and equip people and young people with the skills for a changing future. And many of those skills are things that are good for their mental health in general. Like, how do we sit with uncertainty? How do we sit with complexity? How do we sit with some of these paradoxes? And that there's a lot to grieve, a lot to be fearful of, and a lot of joy and meaning and purpose to still be found, and that this is something that's going to go on and unfold across our lifetimes. And so, of course, it's urgent, but it's also, as well as, it's not just a sprint. This is a marathon. This is an evolving situation where we need to be taking action, but in a way that's sustainable, in a way that's collective, and in a way that enables us to imagine the futures that we want to create, the stories that we want to tell, that the teams and the communities that we want to be a part of. And so when we're talking about climate change, it's really important to tell the truth about the situation that we're in, but also that there is opportunities at the same time, and it's not one or the other. This is not we're going to win or we're going to lose, but at the same time, there are opportunities and there are amazing things happening. And when we hear those stories, when we hear the amazing things that are happening, that can have big ripple effects as well. In the work that your podcast is doing,
exactly.
People can see themselves in that, and then they can see how they can be part of that. And that activism doesn't have to mean, it can mean, but doesn't have to mean marching in the street. It can mean a whole bunch of things that we do in all of our lives.
Including that positivity and, as you say, not overburdening, but being part of that conversation. So there are positives, because you do speak as part of the Connecting Climate Minds work. You have spoken to people all over the world to presumably help shape policy moving ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because you've alluded to your own struggles with mental health earlier. When you process this information, how do you take that anxiety on board and create something good out of it?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this is an ongoing learning for me too, right? It's sort of, we're all researching this or supporting other people through this in different ways. And I'm not a clinician, but as a researcher, but we're learning as well. And when I hear about the climate crisis, when I see the effects, so in South Australia, where I'm from at the moment, there's a huge drought. I can actually feel sort of tears coming to the back of my throat, even my throat tightening, thinking about it, of the trees dying, the animals we've had kangaroos come to my family's backyard because they're looking for grass, they're hungry. And, I could easily become very teary if I think about that. So I sometimes feel very sad. I sometimes feel very, very angry. Sometimes feel very, very overwhelmed. At the same time, I try and hold space for multiple things. And for me, and through the work of Joanna Macy and many other colleagues who have worked across this space, there is an opportunity here to, in the midst of challenge, to really learn how to live a richer life as well, one that holds those and makes space for those emotions and finds way to bear witness with that and with others, and forge deeper connection through that to ourselves, to nature, to what we love, because we feel this because of what we love, and to find sort of meaning and purpose in that, and to also find practices that help. So different things will help for different people. The awareness of the climate crisis interacts also for me, like for many other people, with other things like decisions about children and my children's future. And so, and when these things can be really, really overwhelming and paralyzing, and when it starts to become too much, that's when people might need professional mental health support as well. And it can sort of paralyze people. But taking action in tandem with that kind of inner work, those other practices, for me, it's an ongoing learning of how to see myself as interconnected to the rest of the world in such a way that I know that what I do has a ripple effect through the system, but it's also not all on my shoulders.
That is the key thing, isn't it? It's not all on your shoulders. This is not your burden. This is not any one person's burden. It is a collective challenge. Emma, thank you so much for coming along today and talking to us about creating that richer life, and talking to us about those stories that you've been collecting and how that will shape policy. But reminding us also about your own background and how important it is that we love, how wonderful our planet is. When you talk about your family and you talk about your home and those kangaroos, it puts everything back into perspective and helps us appreciate our world for the better. So thank you very much to Emma. We appreciate your time today. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we must work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels, and please do email us at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk. We'd love to hear your ideas and views. If you've got any suggestions for guests, we'd also love to hear all about that. But for the moment, thank you very much to Emma for coming along and sharing all of those incredible stories and talking to us about your work at Imperial, such valuable work. Thank you, Emma.
No worries. Thanks for having me, and thanks for bringing all these stories into the world.
I'm Liam, and I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.